Having the influx of foreign-born players is good to lift up the standards of the national team in the short term. And I think we should still use it. The Malaysia, Indonesia national team should still use it judiciously. But the thing is, the longer bigger picture is how are you going to raise up the entire standard of the whole football ecosystem overall, so that your players can show that they're more than good enough to match Thailand, to send players to play in the J1 league, not J2 or J1, like what Chanati and Keraton Bumantan have done with some success. With naturalisation quite the rage in Southeast Asian football these days, almost every national team in the region is attempting to get heritage players or naturalized players from overseas to fill up their national team ranks in their respective bid to raise up its ranking, raise up its international standing, or be more competitive at in certain levels of a tournament or qualifier, such as Indonesia, who are going through the final round of World Cup qualifying for the 2026 edition, which will be held in North America. And their massive influx of heritage players last year has seen rival fans from other Southeast Asian nations dubbing them as Netherlands B, Netherlands C, or the New Dutch East Indies, and so on and so forth. But Indonesia is not the only Southeast Asian nation to be guilty of that naturalization process, where they scouted for any player who has the Indonesian diaspora outside of their home nation, outside of Asia, particularly in their former colonial masters, the Netherlands. And that's where they have drawn much of their new national team players from. At the same time, Malaysia is not spared from this either, with Tunku Mahkota of Johor, or better known as TMJ, who is also currently the region of the southernmost state in the Malaysian peninsula. He has mentioned that he's going to bolster the current Harimau Malaya squad with 7 potential new heritage recruits whom he has claimed he or the team has potentially identified to help strengthen the weaker areas in the national squad. And that move is likely to parallel that of what has happened to Indonesia last year. And given the increased frenzy in the naturalization of players to bolster the ranks of these two national teams, Tayaja takes a look at whether this is actually a good thing for the Nusantara rivals or otherwise. And in this context, we are going to look more collectively at whether this burst of a mass influx of heritage players or naturalized players is really going to help either national team in the near future or even in the midterm or otherwise. For neither of them are exactly the Philippines. The Philippines has recently launched a second wave of heritage players any player in Europe or the United States who has Filipino blood through their parents, through their grandparents, they are able to apply for they are able to qualify for a Filipino passport. And it especially helps that Philippines is one of the few Southeast Asian I think probably the only Southeast Asian country that allows for legal dual citizenship, where the targeted player does not have to lose his original passport just to play for the Philippines. But Indonesia and Malaysia do not follow that policy, though, like the majority of Southeast Asia. So in this case, where the foreign players are concerned, they have to follow the FIFA regulations, where they had to, where these heritage players or naturalized players, wherever they come from, they have to fulfill one of the two criteria. The first one is a very straightforward case. For the player, he has to be identified with the other nation through family lineage up to the point of the grandparent. If your former great grandfather or grandmother or the great great grandparent comes from that supposed second nation, no, sorry, it's a real no-go. And unfortunately for Malaysia, the past month has been quite a, you can say it has been a relative scare where this is concerned, because there's a rather now defunct but already infamous social media platform called FR Future Talents, who had tried to claim that player X, player Y, player Z, or player A, B, C, whatever it is, hails from some part of Malaysia, and the most ridiculous part is that kind of scouting is so illegitimately done that TMJ has to come out to apologize to one or two players who were affected by this scandal, because it had nothing to do with FAM, it had nothing to do with TMJ. It was this particular individual's own mechanizations, his overwhelming desire to see a squad filled with his favorite or so-called eligible players. But it's not so straightforward as identifying player A to Z through this kind of randomized method. And it came to a point where those players in the Premier League who were identified, they had to come out and clarify that they do not have any Malaysian heritage, full stop. That's how bad it is. But coming back, but for the one or two who do qualify, they also would like to consider whether they would really want to play for the other national team which they qualify for, because it's not as straightforward as just merely swapping one passport for the other. He also has to consider the future of his club career in the country of his birth, where it's quite evident that, let's say in the United Kingdom or particularly England, where the Premier League is obviously of a much higher standard than that of the Malaysian Super League or even the best league in the region, Thai League 1. But still, having a proper legitimate process where it happens, it will allow the quality of these foreign born players to raise the level of the national team, as what Indonesia had dramatically done with that en masse influx of Dutch born players who have Indonesian heritage and qualify for the passport and were fast tracked to be included in the Indonesian national team. I mean, by having players who have high quality football education, particularly from Europe, it gives them a head start where their playing at level, their mentality, their football thinking on and off the pitch are miles ahead of the local bonds. And before I further touch on from there, let me go on to the second point, the second and last point on which a foreign-born player becomes eligible to play for the other nation. And that is through the fire residency rule if he does not have any particular previous ancestry lineage from that nation. And for a few cases actually, like Kyoga Nakamura of Singapore, or even in the past where Malaysia had and Indonesia actually had a handful of players who actually qualified through the other routes. I mean, if you remember Indonesian Uruguay-born striker Cristiano Gonzalez, or Malaysia's rather heritage flop Guilherme de Paula, the Brazilian-born, or the more recent ones in the Malaysian national team such as Romel Morales, the Colombian-born forward, Paulo Jose, the Brazilian-born attacking midfielder, just to name a few. And whether it's through the heritage route or the naturalization route, the main goal is to raise the standard, the level of the national team that would otherwise have been even with the best coaching practices and technical ideas and plans, would have probably stagnated, or the growth would have been a lot slower. But having this such an influx of these foreign-born players, one has to ask this question: where do the locals stand where this is concerned? And for the local bonds, are they really delighted to be in that position? Probably yes, but more likely not. Because unless you are Arif Aiman, where he is a definite starting 11 even in the AFC Champions League elite, where all the other 10 teammates are either foreign-born naturalized Malaysians or foreigners. He's the only local born usually in that starting 11 in all JDT's AFC Champions League elite gate matches so far this season. Unless you are of that level, then how about the others? How about the centre backs? How about the midfield, the local born midfielders? How about especially the strikers? How would they feel? Because to be honest, right now, the former coaches of Malaysia and Indonesia, who were ironically South Korean, Shin Tae-yong and Kim Pang-gon, had done delicate jobs in balancing the quota to ensure that that squad will not be overwhelmed by so many foreign faces. And both coaches had that Asian Cup Finals tournament to be able to push through, to be able to see through these two groups of players through a proper tournament setting where they would be where there are various considerations, where there are various factors that come in that impact the team's performance on and off the pitch, and also strategic calculations at the group stage, particularly for Indonesia. But that perfect blend of locals and naturalized or slash heritage players, when blended well, they can be a good mix of both the best of local and also the raising of the bar through these import players for the national team. But when you have too many, and this is probably the case for Indonesia for a while now before the ASEAN Championship, and possibly soon for Malaysia, as though Malaysia had not been there before, but even in the past when they had quite a number of for heritage or foreign players, there's still more than enough local players who were equally capable of filling that spot to compete for those places in the starting 11. But the thing is, how about those local bonds who were trying to break through from the national youth teams, who had previously featured in Asia in the under 17 or under 20 Asian Cup finals, only to find that, oh dear, this foreigner has somehow blocked my path to go out further into the Garudas or the Harimau Malaya. How would they think? And that's where both football associations really have to think about, because for the local bonds, their heart with the national team is a lot stronger than those heritage players, and for some naturalized players also, because they are born in this country. They have lived, breathed, and slept football through the local way for much of their childhood, their adolescence, and into their adulthood, where they know the ins and outs of local football, the quirks, the culture, the idiosyncrasies of how local football works, and how the mentality of the players overall in that culture is. And to be able to willing to adapt and adjust in circumstances, especially when they play against stronger teams. Yes, admittedly, with an all-local born squad, they are more likely to lose against a stronger Middle East or East Asian national team than achieving the odd point or so. But it gives them the pride to be able to fly out from their kampong, from their school, from their sports school or the first clubs or academies where they first had their training to be able to push up to that level where they showed that they are more than good enough to be in the main national team. But when you when you have so many foreign-born players who are inside the national team because of the heritage route or the fast-track passport process, it is going to be a hindrance, because it's quite likely that the national coach of the day, Patrick Kluivert for Indonesia, and the new Malaysian national coach Peter Klimowski, they will probably give the heritage and foreign-born players advantage. You can say almost automatic places in the national squad over the local bonds. But for Indonesia's case, ironically, there are already one or two foreign-born victims because of the Dutch influx, like the English-born central defender Elkan Bagot, and one or two others who don't really fit into these plans. So, and especially when you have such an overwhelming mix, and you know that, like in Indonesia case during the World Cup qualifiers, Shin Tae-yong had, you can say, make it a point to have two local bonds in the squad, because the local fans will not be able to fully relate if you put in an all foreigner 11, unless you're a neutral fan who only cares about the result, who only wants to be in there as the team of the moment, as what Shin Tae-yong has managed to create and arouse that fervor among the average Indonesian football fan during his 5 years as the Garuda's head coach. And this fervor, this passion to support the Garudas, it's a reclaimed process in which that passion had long dwindled for a while, especially after the tragedy in Malang, after all the previous issues that PSSI had prior to Eric Thohir's takeover as president of the FA. So Shin actually had done his part by building a new core of local players, probably to the chagrin of some coaches, but he had this trusted core group of young and uprising players such as your Pramata Ahan, Asnawi Mangkualam, Marcelino Ferdinand, Hockey Chakara, just to name and say Muhammad Ferrari, Rizky Rido, just to name a few of them. When you have this local core to complement your foreign-born players, it's a perfect blend. But when you have more and more, and it's quite likely that in the quick pursuit of fast results, you are likely to trust your foreign 11 more, regardless of whether it's in play in humid weather or hot desert conditions, or in freezing cold winter temperatures that are going on in the northern hemisphere, whether it's in Japan or China or even Uzbekistan. I mean, just saying as an example, it's like, but how would these players react through these drastic weather changes? They have adjusted all this while, but for newer ones to come in, how would they react? And I think it's a similar parallel for Malaysia. If done correctly, it will be a massive boost where Arif Aiman can get to play alongside these foreign-born players as one of the key local bonds in the national squad. But when you have too many, how about the other locals? Will they be as motivated to try to say, they think that they will have a chance to play for the national team? Because let's be straightforward on this. In theory, the fans would like to think that the national team is supposed to be the place to be for your nation's best local players, best players available who are eligible to be Indonesian or Malaysian or whichever nationality the fans come from. But at times, it's not so straightforward. It's less straightforward. You can say that certain players have been frozen out under Shin Tae-yong, but the benefit is you had a young promising group of core players, and you got these few players like Sandy Walsh, Elkan Bagot, who else? Rafael Struik and Justin Hubner. They all who have blended it so well in the 2023 Asian Cup finals last year, who were able to push the team to reach the round of 16 for the first time. Granted, they also were able to beat fellow Southeast Asian national team Vietnam in the group stage to reach this far. But that blend is the perfect ideal. But when you feel had like only one local, two locals, sometimes it's harder for a section of the fans, whether it's a majority or the minority, who feel that hey, the national team should be made up of local born. If we are not so good, never mind. These are our best boys who are giving everything for their country of birth, to represent their country, the city, the club, the kampong, the school. It's like carrying everything on their shoulders, while these foreign born players come in without any knowledge of what it means to be a true Indonesian or Malaysian. I think you get the feeling it's like if you have so many imports, results wise, level quality wise, in terms of play, it's easier for your coaches, the coaches of the day, to be able to dissect all these parts. What gives? I mean, if you have more locals sitting on the bench, local balls sitting on the bench as a result of all this influx, what would they think? Are they going to realize that, hey, it's like if the coach is getting very predictable, going to say a heritage of foreign bonds sought for another one as during a substitution, what would those few think? Would they feel like they are being left out of the whole process? Would they feel as motivated to want to fight for a spot and be noticed and to be called up? Because coaches do have their selection biasness, to have their selection, you can say probably prejudice, or more politely criteria that they look at when they look at the local players. Are they going to just overwhelm the squad in the pursuit of an immediate goal, like for Indonesia for the 4 games in March and June, to push for a place in the World Cup finals, to finish second behind Japan and take that spot, or at least even force a playoff for another chance in qualifying for the World Cup? Or you can say you raise the level of the national team, you integrate them, and you let the local boys realize that what it really means to play at this higher level, especially at the final round of World Cup qualifiers for this instance, or playing in the Asian Cup finals. What does it mean for these local bonds to be able to play for a country at this stage, and which is much higher than your ASEAN Championship? What gives? And this is not a straightforward issue, because the diehards who are linked with the local league, who are also hardcore supporters of the local league, who know the players, who know the clubs, who know the administration and the quirks of the league inside out, they are going to be championing more of having those local born players, even if they don't really fit the bill to be inside the national squad, to be inside the national team, whatever the circumstances. But as with much of Southeast Asia, where the majority of the average football fan watches European football or follows the major international tournaments around the world, well, if you have a team that's able to beat your Saudi or push China to the limit, or say possibly if one day able to hold Japan to a goalless draw or a score draw, like what Vietnam did at that stage of the tournament previously, I think they wouldn't mind. But or maybe keep that World Cup dream alive, who knows? Then they will go for the result. It wouldn't matter to them if they had 11 Dutch-born players as the starting 11 and maybe a Risky Rido and Marcelino sitting on the bench. And potentially it could be the same case for Malaysia, where Klimowski may be inclined to choose all these foreign-born players, the heritage players, and maybe have Arif Aiman as probably the lone local-born player for Harimau Malaya, as they seek to push for another Asian Cup appearance and trying to overcome Vietnam in the same qualifying group. But then, what gives? Because one thing about players' lifespan, whether it's local, foreign-born, they have a set time span. Nobody's going to play for this national team forever unless you are from an amateur local club, unless you maintain exceptional fitness levels and commitment to want to play for the national team for more than 10 years. Are we going to see Indonesia repeating this kind of exercise that they have been going through for the past 2 years and counting? Not likely again. Probably once they reach the World Cup, they play the World Cup finals, probably that's it. Malaysia has gone through this kind of thing for a while, albeit at a slower pace since Brandon Gunn became the first heritage player to don the Malaysian national jersey. But still, for a nation that had otherwise for a long time been resistant to the idea of having foreign-born players into the Harimau Malaya, while this is not new territory anymore, but would they want to accept a situation where probably only Arif Aiman is good enough to be inside that starting 11 where the rest are all heritage or foreign-born? It's going to be a lot harder to explain, a lot harder to ask, but if the results go their way, like for many of the casual fans or even for the hardcore, yes. Even if it comes at the expense of the domestic league, it's like, this local league is like this. Oh, the local league is like that. But never mind. Our national team with this group of players is good. It's clean. It's not steamed by those nonsense in the league. We will support them. They have played at this high level. Let's go and push back them. But that's going to happen for at least the next 5, at most 10 more years, at most. Then when a new president comes in, when a different administration team comes, council or executive decision making body comes in thereafter, that will be at the end of that spell. And probably there will not be enough finances to continue this kind of thing. So what gives? Is it because from where this trajectory is concerned, unless you have an open policy like the Philippines, where they allow for dual citizenship, otherwise it's going to be quite challenging to keep this going infinitely, because resources are always going to be finite. Once Eric Thohir go, it's not going to be another businessman who's going to take over. It's not going to be the owners of Mola TV or some tycoon in Indonesia who is Chinese Indonesian, for example, to come in, or Vincent Tan to suddenly come and take over TMJ, for example. And this kind of bankrolling will continue. No, it's not going to work like this forever. But for a while, when it comes to lifting up the national euphoria, the feel-good factor in our football, it's understandable. At least you know that with these players, you have a better chance of winning in Southeast Asia, to do more than credibly in Asia. But 10 years later, even 20 years later, after this policy is done and dusted, will the standard of the players suddenly hit through the roof because of what their predecessors, when they were with those foreign-born players, through their limited interactions in the national team, suddenly will get the eureka to just say, okay, I think this is what's needed to play at a high level. You need this, you need that. Probably, yes, but it's a lot harder because for the local bonds, the obstacles to try to play in Europe remains, no matter how talented he is. And there's also the salary factor. And assuming that this star player is given a lucrative contract to play at home regularly, is he willing to take a massive pay cut just to play abroad and to get, and it's like you don't get as much money, but you get a better football education. And usually this has to involve owners of usually the same nationality to be able to push through. But it's also dependent on the owner of the day. Is he football passionate, or is he there just to make that European club that he owns profitable, or to earn profit after selling? Because as far as I'm concerned, if draw from Singapore, no Singaporean has gone to Valencia under the Singaporean billionaire Peter Lim to be trained or to be playing even in the junior team. It shows the level, the high barrier of entry that's needed to even enter the academies of those clubs. Not even money could break this barrier, because if you're good enough, they will sign you. If you're not good enough, no matter how much money you own, yes, probably it will give you an entry, but will that player be able to progress further after that? or what you may call to draw to take a leave out of Formula One, a pay player, harder, a lot harder. So I think it's because the thing is ultimately the local play standard will not be increased dramatically. Then how about those players who have interacted with those foreign born? Are they going to learn the best practices from their foreign born counterparts to pass on to the next generation? Given the local cultures in Southeast Asia, it is a bigger ask than what we think and what we would like as the ideal, but it's going to be tougher unless they have also been educated in all the elite overseas coaching courses in the UEFA nations, or in Japan where the S license is the highest level of coaching certification. Otherwise it's going to be quite difficult. Then because it's about lifting the national morale, it's about lifting the national mood, but for the hardcores who see the bigger details, who see the intricacies of the local game, they'll feel that the local league is being neglected, and they'll feel that it's unfair. It's like even if you lose 5-1 to Japan or to South Korea, it doesn't matter because you're playing against those boys. This is our level and we should accept it as it is. But for many of the casual fans who know only of the top level football, having such a team ultimately is a godsend, and they will want that for now. And if Indonesia do go on to reach the World Cup finals next year, I can tell you, the Indonesian fans who have seen that moment, they'll keep talking about it for decades and decades and decades. And maybe who knows, will it come another day in a different era of governance, in a different era of global politics where they can replicate this thing? It's harder to tell. Sometimes it is a once in a lifetime thing. That you do it once, you do it good, and that's as good as it gets. And you can think of the likes of your Jamaica, your Trinidad and Tobago as prime examples where this is concerned. But what about the rest? And hence, I think having the influx of foreign-born players is good to lift up the standards of the national team in the short term. And I think we should still use it. The Malaysian, Indonesian national team should still use it judiciously. But the thing is, the longer, bigger picture is how are you going to raise up the entire standard of the whole football ecosystem overall, so that your players can show that they're more than good enough to match Thailand, to send players to play in the J1 league, not J2 or J1, like what China team and Tiraton Bulmantan have done with some success, or to push up to such a level where your local core, the next generation, where they're more than good enough to push through to the under 17, under 20 Asian Cup finals, maybe once in a while go into the World Finals through qualification, and then you go on to progress into the national team as a result, and you raise the level through the local born players who have improved because of better coaching. And that is also where you have to come into the bureaucracy, the politics and all that. It's not going to be easy. It's not a straightforward matter where you can say we should keep doing this forever and ever, because at some point maybe the national politics of the day will say, hey, this is too much, put a stop to all the foreigner naturalization nonsense, and the FAs would ultimately be the biggest losers when that stops. But if the FAs can see a bigger picture of pushing more local cause in a way like how Shindale had done with the Young Garudas, then you can see a better future ahead where there will still be a level of competitiveness in the the main national teams even after those foreign-born naturalized players hang up their boots. And I think this is where both Malaysia and Indonesia will do better to not just look at merely the short term of qualifying for the World Cup, qualifying for the Asia Cup, but also look to, okay, let's raise this level of local bond, the coaching, the football education. And I think especially for Malaysia's case, where they would yearn to say, we want to really put a campaign where it's more memorable than 1972 Olympics or your Sochin Aung, Santokh Singh, Mukhtar Dahari, and all these people. Because at least for the Asian Cup, what your Paulo Jose's, your Faisal Halim's, and your Faisal Halim's did is that it was more than enough to erase the nightmarish memories of 2007 on home soil, but that is not enough. They can still be better. The Harimau Malaya can still be better even with or without the new naturalized players, heritage players. Same for Indonesia. They have such a wider base. What are they doing to raise up that kampung level to a higher kampung level? And I think this is where PSSI and FAM really have to think deeper beyond the heritage players, because there's also only so much Eric Thohir and TMJ can do, because even one day they will go on to bigger political roles and will not have enough time to devote on football again. And when they rise up, they will have to leave something behind, and football will be poorer for it, because if there's no legacy, there's no continued regeneration of young talents who are more than capable of stepping into these foreign born players' shoes, boots, then it's going to be very difficult. It will be very difficult. In the short term, it's a big plus, but in the middle to long term, if things remain the same in the local front, in the grassroots front, in the coaching front, in the player mentality, then everything will still stay the same. It will be one big hike before it goes down as dramatically as it rose.